Hey Internets, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you are new to the channel, we cover fantasy, sci-fi, superheroes, anything dorkly. We probably have a playlist on it, so feel free to check us out. Today, we are talking about Lord of the Rings. Specifically, a question actually that my wife Jackie asked. She said, you should do a video on the Rohirrim. And that's why we're married. Okay. So yes, fascinating story, the Rohirrim. So if you know from Lord of the Rings, the books or the movies, the Rohirrim play a pretty big part in that. You got, of course, Rohan, the king of Rohan, Theoden, the leader of the Riders of Rohan, Éomer, Theoden's nephew. Once they get on the same page, they accomplish quite a bit. In fact, probably two of the most breathtaking scenes from the movies are the two different rides of the Rohirrim. So you've got the Rohirrim saving the day at Helm's Deep, with Gandalf leading them. And then you've got the Rohirrim saving the day, breaking the siege of Minas Tirith, with Theoden leading them. Amazing charges. Looks so gripping. Anyway, so what's their backstory? What's the deal with the Riders of Rohan? Yes, they are the horse lords. Rohan itself is basically horse country. Welcome to horse country. But yeah, the Rohirrim are essentially, that word translates to something equivalent to the horse lords. They lived up north. They were Northmen. Hence, they kind of have a Viking vibe. Minus the boats. Well, that's kind of the field, yeah. So they were kind of like Scandinavian horse men. And they really pick up prominence with the leader named Ural. And Ural, when he's 16, his dad, the king, tries to tame a particularly wild horse, fails miserably, and dies. The horse kills him and runs off. The horse gets the name Mansbane. It's not a good name to have if that's your, that's what you're known for. So, Ural, 16, dad's dead, decides, I'm going to go capture Mansbane. And so he does. Goes and tracks down Mansbane, captures him. Instead of killing Mansbane for killing his dad, Mansbane becomes his horse, and he renames the horse Felaroth. And they are together for decades after that. Flash forward actually to the end of Ural's life. He dies in battle. There's a big fight. He and Felaroth are both killed in the same battle. And just to show you how much of a horse lords these folks are, Ural is buried with honors with his horse. So Felaroth is actually buried with the king. But before Felaroth died, he sired the Meras, which is a kind of an elite level of horse that Shadowfax is a member of. So if you remember from the books, movies, same, Gandalf rides Shadowfax, the fastest horse in the world, essentially. Shadowfax is a direct descendant of Felaroth. And it was said that the Meras could only be ridden by the kings of Rohan or Gandalf. Okay. So anyway, that's the lineage, and that shows you the importance that horses have in this culture. So, go back to Ural for a second. Ural is king up in the north, kind of where the mouth of the Anduin River. Farther down south, at this time, when Ural's just a young king, Gondor is in trouble. There's a group being basically manipulated by Sauron, who at that time is living in Dol Guldur. Basically a group called the Balchoth, in cooperation with a bunch of orcs, I believe from the Misty Mountains, are attacking Gondor successfully. So the current steward of Gondor, so this would have been like an ancestor of Denethor, his name is Kirion. kind of in a desperate measure, he sends out 6 messengers with the red arrow. The red arrow is significant if you can, in the seal of Gondor, if you can pass it off to a culture that's like, it's the Gondor calls for aid, right? So it's the beacons, except it's an arrow. So he sends out 6 riders, essentially, to try to get to these Ural, basically. But it's like a 1,000-mile journey, and they got to go past Dol Guldur. They got to basically go through all enemy territory to get there. It's kind of a suicide mission. And in fact, only one guy makes it. His name is Boromir. Of course, Tolkien had written the entire thing out with this guy. Boromir, he has a whole backstory, and we could tell that story at some point. It sounds really cool, actually. I mean, in terms of like making a little mini-series, you could imagine Boromir attempting to get through enemy lines to get to Ural. So he does. He successfully gives the red arrow to Ural. Ural answers the call, and he and his cavalry head for Gondor, and they get there similar to the way they do in the movies, just in the nick of time, and ride in and decimate the Balchoth and save the day. So the steward, Cirion, is so thankful that Ural answered the call that he gives him, essentially, Rohan, what turns into Rohan. So they have this big meeting on this mountain. It's Aman Anwar. Just called, I think, the Hill of Awe. And it has a good reason for that, because at the time, this is in Rohan. So he meets them in what amounts to the plains of Rohan. And he's like, I'm going to give you all of this land if you will basically, show allegiance to Gondor. Ural does. He gets this huge tract of land, which then becomes, that's what Rohan is. It's the Riders of Rohan, the Rohirrim. But that mountain, or that hillside that they met on and had this very important meeting, was where they had placed the tomb of Elendil. So Elendil, king who died in the War of the Ring to Sauron, that's where they buried him. And then, of course, since they had just given the land away, Gondor basically dug up the tomb and buried him back at Minas Tirith. But until that moment, that was where Elendil had been buried. So Ural moves his people south. They got to come that 1,000 miles. They come down to Rohan. They pledge allegiance to Gondor, and it's a great partnership, and it works out great for all concerned. Interesting little tidbit. So this is after Ural. If you remember Helm's Deep, right? Helm Hammerhand. That's who that's named for. He was one of the kings of Rohan. The horn of Helm Hammerhand shall ring once more in the deep. So that guy. So Helm, there's a family basically in Rohan that tries to force a marriage between Helm's son and this other family. They're trying to broker a power move, basically. Power move fails, and so that family is considered an enemy of the king. And some of them are killed, some of them flee. They're basically in exile. One of those guys, this prince, is named Wulf. Wulf runs off, and he ends up joining the enemy of Rohan, the I always have trouble saying that. The Dundendlings. Dundendlings. I believe that's how you say it. Anyway, those guys, the enemies. They take him in. He becomes a big leader, and he returns basically while Rohan is helping defend the other side of their lands to help Gondor. He kind of comes in the undefended side and takes over Edoras, the Medicel, where the Hall of the Kings, where Theoden lived eventually, years later. He takes it over, and he becomes de facto king of Rohan. He then he goes after Helm Hammerhand and his kids. So Helm hides out in Helm's Deep, of course. And Wulf lays siege to Helm's Deep. And during that siege, actually, Helm starves to death, whatever, freezes to death, probably starves. So he, essentially, Helm died in this siege from this invading king. Eventually, one of Helm's nephews breaks the siege, kills Wolf, and or I think what happens is they do a sneak attack on Aedoras. So it's kind of like a stealth mission to go assassinate this usurper king, and it succeeds. And so they retake everything back and kick all of that family out of Rohan again. But so for a brief time, Rohan was actually ruled by the enemy, more or less. So what else can I tell you about the Rohirrim? Oh, right. One last little thing that's kind of a cool parallel. After the War of the Ring, when Éomer, now the king of Rohan, pledges his allegiance to Aragorn, the new king of Gondor, they do so back on Amon Anwar, the Hill of Awe, back where Ural and Cirion first had their first meeting. So that's where the Tomb of Elendil had used to be. But they honored that same space, this promontory, as a kind of a sacred space. So Aragorn and Éomer meet there once again to basically, reaffirm their allegiance to each other. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen, the Rohirrim in a little nutshell. So thanks a lot. Subscribe if you want to get notifications of future videos. I'll be talking some more about Lord of the Rings. But we're also right now trying to madly catch up before the end of Castle Rock Season 1 comes. It's a really, really cool show, and we were a little late to the party, but we're catching up. So we're going to do a theory video on the final episode of Season 1 next week. So anyway, thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.